Hello, I'm Thomas Hare, Chief Content Officer of the Performance-Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association serving companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the latest episode of Take 20, created by the PDMI's Brand Response Council. These 20-minute live conversations featuring leaders in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world, speaking about the hottest topics in the industry, are scheduled twice a month. Happy March to everyone. And before we get to today's conversation, a housekeeping note, we will be addressing questions from the audience at the end of today's session, but you don't have to wait to ask them. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send your question in. We'll be collecting them and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of the episode. Today's episode closes out a two-part series on data automation. The first episode on January 25th featured a conversation about automation in media buying and selling. You can find it by visiting our YouTube channel. Today, this group will focus on privacy and fraud. Beyond the actual transactions of programmatic display, there's also data that's the core for targeting and distribution. From hash codes to actual mailing addresses, data is linked in ways we've not seen before, all within networks that make appending and connecting privacy compliant. There's a lot going on here, and we're excited to welcome Shane Allor of Kount, an Equifax company. Shane is not on camera today, but he is with us via voice, and Rob Hartwell from Venable LLP to share their thoughts on these topics and much more. As always, PDMI Brand Response Council Chair Chris Foster of Modern Postcard is here to guide the conversation. Welcome, team. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Thomas. And welcome, Rob, to the first Take 20. We're so glad to have you here. This is episode 59, season 3. Shane has been with us before, but welcome in, Rob. We're so glad to have you here. And it's a perfect way to start because we're talking about data privacy. Like Tom had mentioned, one of the questions that's coming up with data in all aspects of the ecosystem and performance marketing is how will fraud, data marketplaces, appending sources or linking sources, and our own personal data as consumers be managed in the upcoming years? What is that intersection of these anonymous hash codes, marketing IDs or MAIDs, IP addresses, and your own name and email and even postal address look like in the next year or two? And how can brands spot the fraud, and how can they understand what are the differences of a website visitor between a real visitor visiting and or a bot? How do you connect that to the Google Analytics showing up and looking at your traffic? How is this intersecting into the social media ads being displayed? It's all really interesting, and it's all kind of mushing and tangling together. So to help us untangle this, we've got Shane and Rob, and we're going to start with you, Rob, for another question. I guess the question coming from Venable, what currently now is considered to be legal when it comes to connecting and or exposing or sharing hash emails, MAIDs, and IP addresses and postal addresses? Where is it actually in the boundaries of legality?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's something that comes up often. Again, Chris, thanks for having me on today. Excited to be part of the conversation. The way we look at it and the way we try to think about it is the definitions of personal information. We look at, say, California, right? That's where everyone is focused. That's the one where there's been enforcement and there's still regulations being made. Under the CCPA, CPRA, anything that can be related back to the individual of the device is within scope of personal information. So you're going to see hashed emails, MAIDs, sometimes IP addresses. It really depends on how you're using it. The baseline, I think, is to look at what data do I have, and can I relate it back to a device or an individual, right? That's a starting point. And then it becomes, what can I do with it? And it's not that, I mean, importantly, you're talking about fraud uses. Fraud prevention remains a use of data that is really considered baseline, routine and essential in some ways. That data can be used for that outside of, if you look at some of the restrictions. Now, does that mean everything you want to do with the data just because you happen to use it for fraud prevention in one part of your business can be used for everything? Probably not. You need to look at how you're using that same piece of data in different ways. So is it being used for marketing in one place? You might need to, if you're doing, an email campaign, look at your canned spam compliance for the same hashed email address that's used for fraud prevention in the other part of your business. So it's not so much that things are being made illegal under the current laws. There's no restrictions, some more opt-outs to look at, some more disclosures to make, but it all goes back to the same starting point of what do I have, and can it be relayed back to an individual or device?
Right. That's interesting. And so I guess one of the question that I guess Shane will go to you as it relates to fraud and fraud prevention. That's what is done all day long with you guys.
Hmm.
How are you seeing this change over the last year and what companies are able to provide when it comes to data and fraud protection?
Yeah, and that's a great question because it's as the digital marketplace evolves, as well as different limitations when it comes to privacy. Of course, we want to keep in mind with true American values, which is privacy. But as a
Hmm.
fraud prevention provider, it's gosh, I want to make sure that we can establish trust with any sort of digital interaction for the consumer to protect them, but then also to the to be able to provide sufficient service for the merchant to be able to again drive into those key KPIs with revenue stream, but never get hit with a fraud ring. So for us, and I would say fraud prevention strategy as a whole, it's being able to outline not just the pertinent information that sometimes or most of the time fits into the, I would say, more the PII data, but
Hmm.
then also contextualizing it with more so, I'd say, the overall digital footprint. So being
Right.
able as Rob said, understand device information and how do we link that to with the information that we have to link that to feedback as well as outcomes we've seen historically with this certain persona, um, and how we can leverage different attributes that don't fall into more of the privacy legalities, that you should not be able to use, to be able to protect consumers.
So and that's such an interesting line to walk, right? Because
Right.
you have a digital footprint and you need to protect merchants from fraud, yet at the same time you can't overreach in terms of tapping too deeply into that customer information. So I guess Shane will stick with you.
Mhm.
Where is really the burden of work fall? Does it fall on that merchant? Does it fall on the data providers giving the merchant the data?
I always think it falls on the merchant. Like,
Okay.
the unfortunate part is merchants have to deal with so many different things. One of those buckets being fraud prevention. When you're running an e-commerce business, if we're looking through that lens, and that's on them. And they know their business better than anyone else out there. So in tune, they would know their customer base better as well, and where to look out for those anomalies. So
Hmm.
it's being able to leverage what they know and utilize that and leverage that with in-house tools and services and strategies. And then as well as needed, based on the complexity of their business, it's being able to leverage third-party providers out there that's their job day in and day out, is to prevent fraud. But at the end of the day, the merchant wants the customer, they want to retain the customer, and they want to treat the customer with the utmost respect, as well as security and certainty that their transactions are all being safely trusted.
It's funny because it's yet another thing the merchant has to deal with on an e-commerce situation, right? Not only
Right.
do they have to create a great product and make money and market it and have a great user experience, they also
Yeah.
have to worry about fraud, right? It's one
Yeah.
more thing from the data side. So Rob, I guess one question that I would have for you is, as you see and give advice to e-commerce companies,
Mhm.
handling data, right? They're like, oh my gosh, I've got all this fantastic data. What can I use and what can't I use? Is there some clarity that you can provide to make it easy for the merchant who, like we said, has to deal with 200 to 300 other items in their day to day?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's an interesting quirk. Get to your question in a second. I think when Shane was talking, it's another one of those things where when these laws are written, a lot of the onus gets put on people like the merchants or app developers or the kind of consumer touch points to do the disclosures and the opt-outs, and it doesn't always mirror how we know in the industry things actually work, right? Data flows kind of in a lot of ways. There's a lot of different parties doing things like fraud prevention in the background. So it's one of those things where when you talk to policymakers and legislators about how they're drafting these things, you explain how it works and they go, well, they should just be able to put a notice up and deal with it. It's like, well, that'd be great, but it just means that, some businesses can do that better than others, and small businesses, take the biggest hit when it comes to managing those customer relationships. But to your question about, how should someone, a small business like that approach this? you have all this great data, but when you're working, you should really look at some kind of baseline due diligence on partners. And are they going to be service providers? If you want to take again, we'll use the California parlance. If they're agreeing to be a service provider, being able to look at it and say, okay, they're going to use my data for this one purpose, one or two purposes that I tell them to, and it's not going to get sent to other third parties further down the chain for other purposes. And that can serve a lot of, and it can remove a lot of the onus from the merchant, the business, for things like opt-outs of sale, some of those other pieces. But making sure that you can trust your partner, that they're going to do that for you. And then there are other times you need to engage third parties to help you with marketing or other parts of the business, and just saying, hey guys, can you give me a checklist? What do you do for your compliance with X, Y, Z? So having a few of these stock questionnaires, we find them very helpful. It's ways that you can manage the various partners you need, and then get back and have some kind of clarity on how you're going to do that. And there's some work amongst some of the industry to try to standardize some of that, because it's hard, not just on the merchant to know what they should ask, but then every single company that's getting these questionnaires they're all different. Everyone uses different words for everything.
Sure.
So some kind of clarity around that stuff would be helpful, and I think there's some movement in the industry to move that way too, to start setting those kind of standards.
It's interesting, Rob. You talk about the standards, and I think that I think that's one thing in the last couple of years that we've been lacking is a data standard per se, a playbook that everybody can kind of follow, right? Canned spam, I think it's very easy to understand, right? When sending out emails, you've got to have certain things, and if you follow this certain guideline, you're canned spam compliant. But that's not true on the data side, right? So you can have a service company that says, great, hey merchant, I can actually track foot traffic into a store based on your device ID, and then we can send digital ads to everybody coming into that store, and that way you can serve them online ads and the like, and they can go to your website. So then as a merchant, it's like, well, do I have to have a questionnaire? do I have to know where you're getting this data, right? And so it's a challenge to understand from a standard side what that looks like. And I guess maybe that question, I would go back to you because you had mentioned the individual and device is considered that PI. In that foot traffic example, is there this wall between the data and the device and that person's home or email that you can't cross? Or can you just disclose that you're using the data and give that user the chance to opt out if they want?
Yeah, under the the vast majority of laws, maybe there's one I'm forgetting about in our conversation, but in general, it's not so much that there's a wall between, say, a postal address for your home and your device, right? We've all seen the reports of how those things would be tied together, but it's really, so it's not so much a legal question of can I merge these things? You probably can, if you make the right disclosure, offer the right opt-outs. If for precise location data, you're going to want to get opt-in consent on the device, right? That's under the Digital Advertising Alliance's mobile guidance, for the location data from a device. You're going to need consent, and the platform holders require that too, Apple and Google. But then the question becomes, if I'm the merchant, do I want to do that? Like, becomes more of a business question of, is the lift I'm going to get from this traffic worth the potential that I become the New York Times poster child for free traffic, right? So it's this hard balance of, there's the legal piece on one end, and then there's the reputational considerations. And I think those are great. I love getting ads for where I'm at and getting a discount for this coffee shop I walk into, right? Those are great. But there are some businesses that might not want to do that. And that's the question I think a lot of people are grappling with, less so on the legal side, more just how do I want to do this?
Sure. And I guess, Shane, the question that I would have for you when you're talking with merchants about fraud protection, are these the kind of questions they're asking you? Are they looking for you for advice outside of fraud protection because you're within the data realm?
Yeah, I would say so. Mostly around how you can apply. I'd say fraud prevention services. Of course, numero uno is always going to be stop the bad guys. But then, as well as I've talked about, probably on a few other sessions with this group, is being able to apply sort of. We're being able to stop the 1% out there, which is the fraudster. Right. But how do you apply that same sort of data to your good customer base? So now you have all this awesome information around the good customer base's digital footprint. Well, gosh, now it leads to a bunch of different new business opportunities for you. It's being able to upsell current customers that you know are good customers, and you have data to support it. And then as well, you can start to adjust different strategies, as you talked about. Like, there's so much onus on merchants, whether it be marketing, selling, creating a product. You can start to understand and support it with good data, utilized through the fraud lens, but repositioning it into customer acquisition, as well as upsell opportunities and lifetime value, all those key drivers for merchants.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, because I love it that you have a whole set of solutions for that 1%, but what comes out of it is something you can apply to the 99%. Before we go, because we're getting close to the 20-minute mark, Rob, you talked about different policies and bills on legislature and the like. I didn't take a note. There is a bill that's being considered right now, and it touches on something that we talked about before. And one of our great friends, Ava Seeley, was on the program, and she was talking about TikTok marketing in the direct response world and how you use that platform and channel for highly responsive direct response ads. I think everyone has realized that now there's a bipartisan bill, which is still crazy. That's something that's bipartisan, but it's being bandied about that could limit or even ban TikTok due to privacy concerns on a massive scale. I have to ask, is this the real deal?
You never know till you know with Congress, right? We saw last year that there's a big push to do kids' privacy in the end of year spending bill, and that didn't happen. But I'll say on the TikTok nature of everything, I think there's a lot more going on there than just the privacy piece, right? There's a lot of politics going on around the relationship with China.
That's right.
And kind of some of those issues too. So I think whether it moves through the House it is bipartisan, but I don't think there's necessarily a bunch of buy-in in the Senate. But even if that happens, you've seen already today. I just saw on Twitter, the ACLU's not a big fan of the bill on First Amendment grounds. So even if something like that moves through Congress, I would expect it to be tied up in the courts for a while.
Okay.
So I wouldn't think if you have a big TikTok media strategy that in the next 6 months that's going to go away, even if there is a lot of blood or something right now.
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you for that. So what I would like to do is I'd like to leave with one final question for both of you, and it's more of a thought leadership, kind of a Karnak moment. Anyone familiar with Johnny Carson? Because I'm old enough to watch Johnny Carson. He had the Karnak, right? Kind of figuring out what the future was. So Shane, I'll start with you. So what do you think the future of kind of the quid pro quo that exists now between customers and brands and the data that they share, what does that future look like, do you think?
I think for merchants, vendors, consumers even, it's being able to be comfortable with being nimble and open to change. As digital accessibility becomes easier than in the past, it opens up the door for a variety of different things. It's one in the positive lens. It's opening up doors to have easily accessible avenues for consumers to acquire goods and services, and then as well for merchants to be able to reach out to larger groups of potential customers and prospects. But then of course being flexible, because as new doors open, the bad guys start to be able to tap into those open doors. So being able to be nimble and change with different trends that come into fruition is always going to be key. And I think for most folks, it's being comfortable with that is the one thing that is going to be important as we continue to see changes in the market in the future.
Excellent. Rob, same question to you.
I think going forward, one of the big things for brands, be it your merchants or big brand advertisers, really it's getting the value up front to consumers and saying this is what the data exchange is getting you. There's research that shows that something like $30,000 of consumer value is created through just ad-supported products and services. You think about every piece of information, news, content that we get, but consumers don't feel that necessarily on a day-to-day basis. And so when they hear things about how, creepy advertising is and how it's, it's now used on Capitol Hill and all these media stories, but then coming back and saying, you get real value out of this. It's not just the 10% off coupon, it's also everything else down the line of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I think the advertising, the merchants, I think the entire industry could really do a better job of getting that message out there to consumers so that there's that counter narrative to the other side of it. And so I think that's something that we all understand instinctively, that there's this quid pro quo, and we get advertising, they get free service, that type of thing. But making it a little more explicit can be helpful.
I love that. And it's so interesting. I haven't, you really got me thinking about that, Rob, because no one's mentioned that before. And it is controlling the narrative from the brand side, right? Because we're in the modern postcards in the direct mail, direct marketing space. And I remember this one time someone said, oh, so you do junk mail. And I'm like, no, actually, we do targeted offers that are relevant to the user based on their profile. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, and I was like, yeah, did you ever get a catalog from a brand that you liked? Yeah. Did you ever buy something from that brand and you weren't aware of them? Yeah, like that's it. It's relevant data. And so I think the idea of that data exchange and doing a better job of the narrative and telling the story of what the exchange gives you as a consumer, right? Because right now we have those big bars at the bottom that says this cookie policy will give you a fantastic website experience, blah, 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 but it doesn't actually tell you what it does for you. It saves you time. It makes your searches more relevant. It makes it more efficient. It gives you special offers. That's an interesting thing that I think the industry could do. All right, this is fantastic. We could talk more, but we've got a time constraint on Thomas. Do we have questions from the audience and the guests?
We sure do. We got a few of them, so we'll try to rifle through them as much as we can. This first one should be a pretty easy, or I don't know if it's an easy answer, but it should be a quick answer if it's easy. When a business legally acquires data on a consumer that opted in, how long does the business have the right to use that information for future marketing purposes? Anyone?
I'll say it'll depend on the type of data, but I think in general, it's as long as, one, what did you say at the time of getting the consent, right? Did you say this is a 6 months, we'll send you 5 offers, right? Whatever you say, you have to honor. And that's, I think, something that you have to, when you're creating those consents and assuming someone opts in, that's what you have to really look at, right? Is what did we tell them? What did we imply? Did we, through the construction of everything, imply that this is a limited consent? These are all things to think about before you reach out to the consumer, before you get that consent to help govern that.
Right. Another one, our clients who expose their ad offer in our national network have access to all the names of consumers for ANI. We are considering offering a direct mail program to recontact. As we offer direct mail, what are some of the things we should consider?
Can I actually answer that one? Yeah, for direct mail retargeting, what you should consider is making sure that the creative tells the right story, that it's not just an image and an offer. It's not an ad in a magazine, right? So there's some storytelling that goes into it. Also, don't mention, hey, thanks for visiting our website. Don't put that on the card itself, because it's just a touch that you're sending. And also pay attention to the where that customer is in the sales funnel, right? They are already interested in your product, but they haven't, and they're still in that consideration mode. So knowing that they're considering you and 2 or 3 or 5 other brands, that's why you're touching them at that point, because you want to bring them back to the site with further consideration and with an incentive and an offer to come in and choose your service.
Great. Thanks, Chris. This one probably more directed to Shane, possibly. Is there an intro to fraud for e-marketers service or workbook or something like that out there that you'd recommend that all businesses take a look at?
Oh gosh, yeah. I know from my personal perspective, our marketing team would always point you to resources on our site at Kount.com. But I would say, in terms of more of the thought leadership side, it's as easy as, I would say, pick up the phone, and if you call a merchant, or if you talk to any of the other folks within the PDMI organization, I bet you everyone's got a war story about when they got hit with fraud, or best practices, or hey, look out for this, or hey, you have a subscription, there's some different things to look out for that might differ from a traditional merchant in X, Y, and Z. That's where I always typically start, and that's I would say that's where I gain most of my knowledge, is talking to the source, which is the people on the ground who are selling goods and services. They typically know more than anyone.
Interesting. Hey, Shane, have you and Kount ever done kind of a fraud protection 101 webinar?
Yeah, we have. We consistently put content out there via webinar on all things. I'd say all things fraud, and yeah, I'd be happy to share that with this group.
That's great.
Yeah, great. Yeah, actually, Shane, if you want to share a link to any of that, please do, and we can actually put that link in the description when we post this up on YouTube.
Awesome.
So, well, thank you, everybody. Chris, Rob, Shane, really well done as always. We appreciate the effort and your wisdom, your willingness to take part. Your next scheduled opportunity to attend a live online Take 20 episode is now Wednesday, March 15th, 2 weeks from today, when I'll join Chris to preview this month's PDMI East Conference in Miami. Please visit thepdmi.com/take-20 to register to hear more about the show, and also to check out the upcoming schedule of Take 20s. We'll resume our Take 20s in early April after the show. So, of course, online registration does remain open for PDMI East, which is set for March 20th through 22nd at Eden Rock, Miami Beach, with up to 4 networking events based on if you're a newbie or whatnot. There'll be 4 networking events during the show, 10 educational sessions, and more on tap. Make sure to join your clients, competitors, and cohorts in Miami. Visit thepdmi.com/PDMI-East for more information and to grab your badge today. Thanks again for checking out this episode of Take 20. Be well. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.